Part 6. You look a lot like Mrs. Rupee, said Andrea. Rupee? Asked the masked lady. Never heard of her. I am Super Librarian. She really looked a lot like Mrs. Rupee to me. Oh, yeah? Well, what superpowers do you have? Asked Alexia. I can log in books and check them out at super speed, said Super Librarian. And I have memorized the entire Dewey Decimal System. Pick a number, and I will tell you what books go with that number. Number 796, shouted Ryan. Ah, you will find books about sports in 796, replied Super Librarian. She's right, shouted Ryan. She really does have superpowers. She does not, said Neil, the nude kid. I bet lots of librarians know the Dewey Decimal System. Well, I can leap over a giant stack of books in a single bound, said Super Librarian. That's not such a big deal, said Michael. Oh, yeah, said Super Librarian. Well, I can shelve books with one hand. No way, we all shouted. It's impossible to shelve a book with one hand. You need one hand to move the other books aside and your second hand to slip the book in its place. Watch this, said Super Librarian. She went over to the bookcase and put one hand behind her back, and then she pulled out a book from the shelf and slipped it between the books on another shelf, using just one hand. Wow, everybody said, which is Mom upside down. Ooh, your powers are indeed strong, Super Librarian, said Mr. Cooper. But why are you here? I have come to get your overdue library books, said Super Librarian. I don't have any overdue library books, said Mr. Cooper. Oh, no, said Super Librarian as she ran back to the bookcase, pulled out a book, and waved it in the air. Then what is this? Well, It's overdue, shouted Super Librarian. If you borrow something, it's important to return it. So now you must pay for your crimes against humanity. But now, wait a minute, I just started working here. No buts, shouted Super Librarian. Everybody started giggling because Super Librarian said butts, which sounds like butts, even though it only has one T. I thought she was going to make Mr. Cooper pay a fine for his overdue library book, but that's not what happened at all. Instead, the weirdest thing in the whole history of the world happened. The two of them started fighting. Mr. Cooper and Super Librarian squared off, and they began to do karate chops and kicks at each other. Hi-ya! It was cool. Oof! Yelled Mr. Cooper. Take that! Yelled Super Librarian. And that! Everybody was yelling and screaming and hooting and hollering. Man, that lady is really serious about overdue library books, said Ryan. Mr. Cooper did one of those spinning leg kicks, but Super Librarian blocked it, and he fell on the floor. It was exciting. We were all glued to our seats. Well, not really. Why would anybody glue themselves to a seat? That'd be weird. And anyway, how would you get the glue off? I don't approve of all this violence, said Andrea. It sets a bad example for children. What do you have against violins, I ask. Not violins, Arlo, said Andrea. Violence, violence. I don't approve of violence. Can you possibly be more boring, I asked. After a few more vicious karate chops, hi-ya, and kicks, Mr. Cooper fell down again. Super Librarian jumped on top of him and pinned him to the floor. Say uncle, shouted Super Librarian. Uncle, groaned Mr. Cooper. When you lose a fight, you have to say uncle. Nobody knows why. Super Librarian got up off of Mr. Cooper and helped him stand up. I'll take this book back to the library where it belongs, said Super Librarian. I'm sorry it was overdue, said Mr. Cooper. I accept your apology, said Super Librarian. See that it doesn't happen again, and I hope you kids will be sure to always return your books to the library. If you don't, you will face the wrath of Super Librarian. Then she picked up the overdue book and dashed out of the room. Mrs. Rupee is loopy. Chapter 9. The Truth About Mr. Cooper. We were in the vomitorium eating lunch. I had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Michael had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Neil and Alexia had peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. In case you're wondering, we all had peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Well, everybody except Ryan. He had a jelly and peanut butter sandwich. He likes to do things backwards. One time, Ryan invented the wick sand, which is sandwich with the stuff on the outside and the bread in the middle. Mr. Cooper is weird, I said to the gang. He's always falling down and tripping over his own feet. Yeah, he's kind of a doofus, said Ryan. We all laughed because doofus is a funny word. It's hard to say doofus without laughing. Yeah, superheroes aren't supposed to fall down so much, said Alexia. Shh, whispered Neil. Mr. Cooper might hear you. How could he possibly hear us? Asked Michael. Well, maybe he has super hearing, whispered Neil. He told us he can make himself invisible. He might be standing right behind us right now. We all turned around. Mr. Cooper wasn't there. But just to be on the safe side, I took out a pen and I wrote a secret message on my napkin. Maybe Mr. Cooper isn't a real teacher. I showed my napkin to the gang. They all grabbed pens and started writing secret messages on their napkins. Alexia, maybe he locked our real teacher in an abandoned barn. Ryan, he's gonna set it on fire. Michael, I saw that in a movie once. Neil, stuff like that happens all the time. Me, fire is cool. At the next table, Andrea and Emily were looking over at us. What are you doing? Andrea asked. We're writing secret messages, I told her, so Mr. Cooper can't use his super hearing to listen to what we're saying. Oh, Andrea sat back down. She had on her worried face, like she was expecting an asteroid to strike the Earth or something. What's bugging you? I asked her. Did you get an A- on something? I'm worried about Mr. Cooper, Andrea said. Well, what about him? Well, my mom is a psychologist, Andrea said, and she told me that when people dress up in costumes all the time, it's because they're sad and lonely and don't like their own lives.